HR workers of Reddit. What's the worst way you've seen an employee screwed over by the company? Story 1. I worked for an oil company and lived through mass redundancies. When the oil went belly up, they sent out a list of which positions were being made redundant, with numbers for how many people currently held that role and how many they were cutting it to. So if it said buyer's current for consultation 3, you knew that if you were a buyer, you'd be under scrutiny and 25 of your team would be gone soon. I sat at my desk and opened the email, looked for my position, no redundancy for me. The girl next to me opened hers and saw her position, current 1 consultation 0. That's how she learned she had lost her job. Story 2. Not in HR, but I can think of 2 examples. There was a fire drill, and upon returning, it was discovered that not everybody returned. Apparently, it was a literal fire drill where some people were told that they had been let go, and this was their way of having them leave. The other example is my dad, who had been with a huge multinational company that tried to fire him a week or so before his 30-year work anniversary. Fortunately for him, the manager forgot to give him the necessary paperwork on time, and he was fired but made it to the 30-year mark, which has extremely heavy implications on pension and retirement. Story 3. In 2008, my company had huge RIF of 100 or so people. The day it happened was just terrible. I walked into a conference room and found the HR guy crying in the dark. 30 days later, they let him go. 2008 sucked. Story 4. I'm just an IT guy, so I don't always know the whole story, but it feels bad locking someone's account on their PC and having them find out that way. Then, of course, moments later, an HR person shows up in their office. Story 5. We had rifts back in 08. They started in February in the Midwest. One gal was escorted out of the secure area, told she was gone, and to leave the building. She was okay with being rife, however. It's February in the Midwest, and it's cold outside. All her stuff was inside the secure area, and they wouldn't allow her to back in. They wouldn't get her stuff for her. She had to stand out in 20F weather until someone she knew would call a buddy to get her hat, coat, purse, car keys. Story 6. Obligatory. Not an HR worker, but my college roommate was a temp in an HR office for college credit. She came home one night absolutely disheveled, makeup smeared, heels in hand, just rough. In a nutshell, her supervisor made her participate in firing a woman for creating a hostile work environment. Seems cut and dry right. Turns out the hostility was directed at a man the woman accused of molesting her daughter. The woman obviously went batshit crazy, crying, begging to keep her job, the works. Told my roommate the entire story about how she dated the guy for years. Thought he was great, but now her 13-year-old daughter had some kind of STD that the guy had given to both of them. Naturally, the mom threatened to kill the guy. The HR supervisor wasn't having it, had security the woman out. My roommate asked the supervisor if she thought the mom was telling the truth. The supervisor, cold as ice, probably we hire some really suspicious people. She shouldn't have left her daughter alone. That broke something in my roommate, and she dropped her business program 5 years in. I think she graduated with a degree in biology or something 2 years later. Story 7. I had a friend years ago, and she worked security First Union Bank's main IT campus. She told me the way they let people go is they would come to badge in through the door, and their card would not work. Out came HR and security, where they would the person to their desk to get their things, and then walked right out the door. She told me about 3 weeks after this started, one Saturday night around 5 p.m., their ATM system crashed, and took them about all night to recover. She told me she thinks someone left them a going-away gift. Story 8. I was the screwed-over employee here. I'm colorblind. My boss gave me a work task that was color-coded in a way that I couldn't see based on color coding of spreadsheet cells, where each color had a specific meaning, and I couldn't distinguish all of them. When I told my boss about this, she decided to write me up for it. Under the assumption I was lying to get out of work, I went straight to HR with a copy of the write-up. The rep told me that there was exactly one way I could get the write-up off my record. I could use our tuition reimbursement program to go take a remedial art class at the local community college so that you can finally learn your colors. She said, that's when I found out that colorblindness isn't protected under the ADA. This was right about the same time that I stayed late one day to cover for a coworker who ran out of insulin in her pump. I stayed about 45 minutes while she went home, got a refill, and came back. The next day, I was written up for the unauthorized overtime. Another coworker went in to the same HR rep to see if she could put her son on her insurance. She was told that no, she couldn't do that since her son lived in Hawaii, and Hawaii isn't part of the United States. I decided about that time it just wasn't worth staying at that company. Story 9. Sears Canada, going through bankruptcy. Many employees were laid off with no severance while the executives were getting 6-figure bonuses. Those bonuses could have covered many employees' severance. Story 10. Not HR, But I was forced out of a job in a shitty way, and want to share, I moved to another state and got a job in an alternative school for kids who had been kicked out of public school for emotional and behavioral issues. The company spent a few hundred hours training me, and I learned a lot more on the job. It was difficult at times, but I enjoyed the work and the people I worked with. After a few months, I felt comfortable in my role. Then, for some reason still unknown to me, the bosses wanted me gone. I was called into a meeting with two supervisors who said that we were now overstaffed. We had 3 vacancies and that I had an exciting opportunity to move to another program. They wanted to move me to our sister program, where you work one-on-one in a public school, which can if you have a tough kid. And in that program, they wanted me to be a sub-floater. So I could get a text at 5 a.m. telling me I had to go to a school an hour away to work with an emotionally unstable kid I've never met before. So I thought about it the next day and told my supervisor that I wanted to stay where I was, but that I would be flexible and go to the other program for a few months if they needed me there, or be a permanent one-on-one with a kid, just not a permanent floater. I didn't hear anything for a week and then get called into a meeting with both supervisors and the head director. The head director says that the other program would be better for my professional development bullshit, and then asked me to tell her 3 of my professional goals that I'm working on, clearly trying to catch me off guard. I make up something and then tell her my reasons for wanting to stay. I don't hear anything for a couple weeks, but the bosses are shitty and begin sending me emails for any mistakes I make that could easily have been said in person. For example, another staff and I were dealing with an escalated kid who had already bit me, and I was tapping my foot while watching him. The director came up behind me, loudly said, "You need to stop doing that in front of the kid." Then she had one of my supervisors write me an email the next day telling me I had to be conscious of tapping my foot or drumming my fingers, which is true, but doesn't require an email. Then I get called into another meeting with the director and 2 supervisors who tell me that I am getting moved to the other program. I gave my 2 weeks notice on the spot, which made my coworkers think I was but didn't help the fact that I needed a new job. My director then still forced me to go to the other program for my last 2 weeks. So I didn't get the goodbye ceremony or anything at the alternative school and could do very little at the other program since they knew I wouldn't be there long. I ended up getting a job at a preschool with a much better boss, but it still frustrates me to think about the whole experience. Story 11, I worked almost 100 on one of the major projects at my company. It was one of only a couple whales that was keeping the lights on. This was during the major oil crash around 2014 or so. The project manager booked a long vacation way in advance, and the client decided at the last minute that all the work needed to be revisited, not by our fault, just compliance with a new regulatory procedure. This was actually great news because it gave a lot of people work to do, which was pleasantly surprising news when layoffs are happening weekly. So we cannot say no. A more senior coworker stepped up and took over. Everything went great, and we got the deadline on time, but it took a lot of overtime on their part. They really came through. I and other coworkers mentioned them by name during performance reviews to commend them. They were laid off a couple weeks later. It was not announced they stopped informing the staff of layoffs because apparently it was hurting morale. I was already planning on leaving to go to grad school, but I could have changed my mind until that point. I pretty just mentally checked out, ignored everyone, and counted down the days until I left. Just remember that if you work for a huge company, you owe them absolutely nothing beyond your scheduled hours. The people deciding your fate could be entire tiers above whatever low-level manager you answer to, and you'll probably never see their face or even know their name. You may get dropped on an impulse to make their spreadsheet numbers look better for their next meeting. Story 12, a colleague of mine was flown from his office in the field to headquarters under the pretense of a leadership meeting and fired immediately. Once he arrived, he was on a plane back home 2 hours later. The boss didn't feel like traveling. Story 13, one owner-founder sells the company to a big corporation, makes a huge profit, and off to the tropics. 2 new management starts to fire people. Over 100 the first 6 months. 3 new management then makes the place so miserable, people start losing it and quitting the second 6 months. For place gets so bad, employees threaten to unionize. Company says if they do, all jobs will be terminated and services exported to India. Worst I've ever seen. Big corporations. I used to work in a warehouse, and one time an employee got seriously injured. His arm and leg were seriously up. This guy worked out a lot, so management pulled him into the office and began to speak to him. "So you hurt your arm at the gym, and now want to blame us?" A pallet of heavy things literally tumbled over near him. If he didn't move right away, he could have easily gotten crushed. Management thought it was a scam. "Do you know what insurance fraud is? Tell us the truth. We know everything. You can't lie to us." The guy was stunned. He wanted to use his health insurance, but the management wasn't hearing it. This continued for some time, a few hours at least. I guess someone overheard because 3 guys from the union showed up pissed, as really pissed. There was screaming, shouting, And then one mentioned that perhaps we should get the Department of Labor and the insurance company involved. I guess that was enough to convince him. He let the employee use his insurance and things went on for a while. Apparently, this guy had a habit of doing this to everyone who was injured. Injury happens. A day later, etc. He literally accused someone of working with a broken arm for 2 weeks before going to the hospital. I think someone either reported him or the union stepped in because he's disappeared. Story 14, made an employee come in at 6:30 for the morning rush hour only to tell her to leave after 10 minutes because they were a bit overstaffed. At least give her 2 hours for her troubles. Story 15, I worked for a company on contract. In HR, if you believe it, was a crappy company. So 6 weeks before the contract ended, I went to the boss and said that I was going to leave at the end of my contract. For the next 6 weeks, I was person non grata in the HR department. I was removed from the group email list. I wasn't told about meetings. They went on 2-day training outside the office. And I wasn't told I arrived at work to an empty HR department for 2 days, etc., etc. On my last day, I was saying goodbye to people around the office, and my boss comes down and demands that I come to a meeting and walks away. After 6 weeks of basically no contact, I was wondering why someone in another department said that they had planned a goodbye party for me. They treated me like for 6 weeks, and then bought a gift, cake, balloons, etc. I said F that, snuck up to my desk, got my coat, left the building, and drove away. Apparently, they sat there for an hour paging me throughout the building before they realized that I had left. Good thing was, I didn't need them for a reference as a friend of mine owned his own company and gave me one saying I had worked there for the year. Story 16, not HR. And I might be a little late to the party, but there was this guy who came to work for us about a year ago. This is hard manual labor, and the guy had quit slinging dope on the street to come make an honest living to support his family. He was having trouble dealing with it at first, but he adjusted and ended up being one of the hardest workers on the floor, always working those 12-hour shifts, staying busy the whole time. Anyway, he works with us for a good long while before his 19-year-old daughter dies, suddenly in her sleep. He, of course, gets a few days off. They probably would have given him more time, but he really couldn't afford to miss any work. Dude held it together so well while he was at work, man. You could tell for sure he was going through some, but he stayed busy still. Well, that next week, I guess he decided he needed a little more time off, but he didn't call out and stayed home for 2 days. After returning from that 2 days, he was immediately escorted out of the building and fired. Story 17, my Fortune 500 company was going through downsizing years back. Everyone knew their turn could be coming, so it wasn't the best of environments. One woman who had been with the company for 20 years was applying for jobs just to see what was out there, but really wanted to stay with current company. She ended up getting an offer elsewhere. So she approached our manager at the time and told him the situation and asked for advice. Boss basically told her nothing is on the horizon, but do what is best for her. So she turned her notice in the very next day. Riffs announced, entire department being let go except the manager. Everyone gets a severance package, except for lady who put notice in the day prior. She lost 40 weeks of pay too per year worked. Boss knew the riffs were coming. He could have advised her to wait a day in a roundabout way. You Derek. On the bright side, she had a new job right away, while the rest of us took some time off and competed for the same open jobs in the area. You know what's getting walked out by security in the middle of your shift because you got fired over something small, petty, and unimportant. Let's finish our shift. Just be like, hey, drop by HR after work. Maybe give us a phone call. We already showed up for work. Let's get paid for that last day instead of driving for nothing. Give us the ability to act with dignity and honor. You strip that, what's left, it's overly dramatic and silly as to walk people out with a corporate cop treating them like a criminal. Yeah, I know some people explode or do something shitty when they get fired, but seriously, grow a pair of and face it as a fact of life that maybe 1 in 1,000 employees will have a storm. No need to treat the other 999 like common criminals, God. Even if people are just peacefully laid off, they can still get walked out like criminals who need a security because they've done some bad ad. Would you like a pair of handcuffs and a billy club to complete the ensemble? If you treat people that shitty, they aren't going to respect the company. Think about that. What do people do when they don't respect the company? They don't work as hard, do they? They don't stick around either. They talk. Now, everybody thinks the job is your own policies are self-defeating. Treat people with a little dignity. Source worked for HP, subcontracted by Deco, aka Gestapo. Saw some stupid in my day. Once a guy was fired for taking a Kleenex from a cubicle to blow his nose. Somebody complained to HR. So HR just fired one of the temp workers for it. Fired Kleenex. What is this, Dubai? Sharia law. Corporate behavior is, and 99 of it is because people who work HR are evil with no soul or capacity to understand or even work out a situation. HR is supposed to be problem solvers, but they don't solve problems. They're the problem most of the time. Allow me to post a happy story involving layoffs and HR, but first a little background where I live. Employers could give out temporary contracts for a total of 3 years. After that, they had to let you go or offer you a permanent contract. Work somewhere for 3 years and a single second permanent contract. This girl was on her 3rd year with all signs pointing towards a permanent contract. Her evaluations were through the roof. She was one of the more productive workers in the department. Good rapport with customers, coworkers liked her, and she loved working there. It should have been a done deal. However, 2 months before she hits 3 years, the company announces a downsizing. As part of this downsizing, all temporary workers will not have their contracts renewed or made permanent. Department head tries to argue with HR, citing everything I mentioned above, but they can't do anything. Downsizing like this is part of labor law as well as the CBA, and they literally cannot make exceptions, but they can offer her transition help, i.e., helping her find a new job. Girl doesn't want to do, but is convinced by the department head to in anyway. So, she brings her CV and the proof of all the training she's had and meets up with the HR rep. HR rep stops at one of her internships she did right before she came to her current job, asks her a lot of questions about it. Then he asks her a lot of questions about how long she's been working at the company. Then he steps out for a good 10 minutes before returning with the head of the HR department. They ask her again to confirm her employment history. Turns out the company she interned at was taken over roughly a year before by the company she now worked for. Also, internships count as work experience, and when the takeover was finalized, the payroll was transferred on a one-to-one basis, including past experience. So, officially her employment with our company was not 2 years, 11 months, but 3 years, 2 months. As a result, her previously temporary contract was now permanent by law, and she wasn't laid off. Story 18 not HR. Happened to me. Went in for end-of-year review and was ambushed by HR VP, company president, and 2 VPs, all of whom proceeded to tell me in great detail for about an hour how much I sucked and how much all my coworkers thought I sucked. They had stories from each colleague small company that claimed happened over the course of a year. I was never informed about any of them, nor given a chance to defend myself. Was absolutely humiliating, and I sat there crying through it. Was told to go home for the day, come back tomorrow, and at some point over the next couple of weeks, I would be told my last day. I left, called my parents crying, decided to clean myself up, and returned to the office an hour later like nothing had happened. I kept showing up day and after day while reaching out to my professional network, and also slowly cleaning our office and cleaning up files for the entire month of January. HR finally pulled me into office early February and said, "Last day, leave and make arrangements to come back to clean out office, clean up files, and turn in key." My response left them dumbstruck. Office is cleaned out. All files uploaded to shared drive. It'll give you a flash drive. Erase my key. Then I skipped out of the office, spent the rest of the week playing tourist at museums, then got busy on a new career in life that continues to be more amazing than I ever thought possible. Story 19 not HR. But I think the way I was fired by my last company was pretty shitty. I worked in marketing for a small company. The company was having problems, and there were crazy internal power struggles which led to my firing. Basically rolls downhill. Boss wasn't meeting sales goals because the salespeople they hired and were buddies with couldn't sell water to someone dying of thirst and needed someone to blame. I went to the Christmas party and had the next 2 days off. The second day I had off, I got a generic email saying my services were no longer needed. The other 2 people in my department got the same email. Turns out everyone else at the party, about 20 people, knew me, and one of the other people, my supervisor, were going to get fired. The company's HR person, real professional, had told a couple people we were going to get fired, and word spread. The third person who got fired was lined up to get my supervisor's job, but got drunk at the party and told the boss it was a mistake to fire us. So she ended up getting fired too. Looking back, not only was it shitty to fire us a week before Christmas, but also shitty to put us in a room of our co-workers who all knew we were about to get fired. Story 20 obligatory not in HR. But one of my best friends, we worked together in a call center. Place was awful. Well, she got really sick, life-threateningly sick. She was in the hospital for 9 weeks, and then was on disability for a while. She was on FMLA and was keeping the company informed of all doctor's orders. She found out she lost her job when she went to fill a prescription, and her insurance was denied. They didn't bother to tell her. They just canceled her insurance. I left shortly before they did that. And it was a good thing, because I would have flipped on HR had I been there. Story 21. There's a case right now in Congress where a soldier was offered $6,000 to separate voluntarily. He had PTSD, which is a 100 disability rating. The paperwork they had him sign at his separation stated he couldn't collect disability. He is currently homeless, and they will let him collect disability if he pays back the $6,000. Just found out about that one today. Story 22 Target. Afternoon on a Saturday, I go to punch in for electronic, and the machine doesn't take my team member ID after several tries. Douchebag higher-up shows up and gives me a condescending come over here. I get let go 4 days after already putting in my 2-week notice, and they had already scheduled me for 2 weeks. Didn't even give me a check, just $800 cash. Not even hundreds, but 20 singles and change. They really can't just call an employee or email them that they're being let go. Gotta go through all that BS. Story 23, first-hand witness, because it was me. Worked at a biotech startup for a year. Saved them tons on in-house development of assay reagents, and had nothing but positive feedback. One of my coworkers was let go due to budgetary concerns and was given a very generous severance. About a month later, my father passed away, and I took a couple of days. When I come back, I'm asked to stay late for a few days, and then on a Tuesday, I'm told that I'm being furloughed until they get a grant approved, but would for sure be brought back on. Lost health insurance, no severance offered, and they'd already canceled my ID badge and parking pass. Couldn't get back in to get my wallet and keys and whatnot, during which time my car was towed. Story 24, not an HR worker. But last week, 3 employees were fired in the company I work in. The lady in charge of terminating people was known in the company as Death, because when she called you in a room, was going down. She fired 2 people following our ridiculous protocol, which basically kicks people out, and then someone else has to pick up their stuff from the desk and take it to them outside. We usually fire them first thing in the morning, so they don't waste a whole day of work for a company they no longer work for. After doing those 2 terminations, her boss called her in her room and fired her too. Story 25, I was not the HR for this company, small tech company owned by an old guy and a young guy who prided himself on never doing dishes he had made. They made an announcement that there was a party in our conference room and had everyone shuffle over. The party turned out to be a mass layoff of everyone and their final checks. Outsourced, it was inside, shutting down all the computers and pulling power cables so no one could do any damage. The backstory, they went to buy the competition. The competition whipped out their checkbook and bought them on the spot. Story 26 had a coworker tell me about one of her previous jobs. Corporate and HR had required everyone meet at a neutral location for a business-type luncheon. Upon arrival, the employees, 300, were split into 2 different rooms. The people in room A were told they were losing their jobs due to some loss of stocks and being forced to downsize, but were being offered a sizable severance. The people in room B were told they would be keeping their jobs, but would also be taking the workload of those in room A. After the meeting, they all had to eat together as it was a requirement to be there. Story 27, we had a company downsizing a few years ago, and the company was looking to find ways of getting rid of people without paying redundancy, basically find any possible misconduct issues and fire people. We had quite a few internet misuse cases, but one guy who had been at the company for 15 years was called into the office for running a gambling syndicate on company property. He was screwed over because this gambling syndicate he had run was a fantasy sports league that basically the whole company played from managers to junior staff. He was fired in a meeting by a number of managers that had all been playing the fantasy league every year. Also, I will point out he ran the league in his own time, so before and after he clocked in and during breaks. Story 28, I worked for a company for 2 years, got asked to relocate to run a department in a satellite store about 2.5 hours away, laid me off with no notice. After 6 months, we decided to go in a different direction. No complaints about the work I did, got a bit of severance and a glowing letter of recommendation, but it screwed me pretty good for a while. Story 29, I was HR in the benefits department. We wrapped up open enrollment. I wrapped up all of our billing for our vendors for the year, was called into the director's office and told I had 4 weeks. Luckily, I had a job interview later that week. I was told that I would get a severance, learned I got the new job to start in a week. I told my boss, and she told me congrats, but you won't get your severance. Bullshit. Story 30, company I used to work for tried to sue an employee into disclosing where he was going. This was a small MSP. Didn't matter. They withheld the check of another, and he had to get a lawyer and labor and industry involved to get a check. Tip of the iceberg. Story 31-0, Oldcastle, again, not HR, but was physically attacked by a female subordinate, I am male, while taking a short break in my vehicle. She opened my car door, violently grabbed my arm, and pulled me out of my vehicle. After returning to work following medical leave related to the incident, I returned to find the employee still working for the company. To make it worse, our desks are 3 feet apart. The 2 of us confined to a room together. Let HR know this was unacceptable, was told that they had dealt with the issue. They had discussed inappropriate touching in the workplace with her. I let them know that a police report had already been filled out and charges had been filed against the woman, but Oldcastle HR refused to budge. I requested to be transferred to a different site, as there were several in the area. Request denied. Told them I refused to work in the same room as somebody who physically attacked me. Sorry, you have to. In the end, given 6 months' pay, and shown the door after over 3 years' service. The other employee was let go in under a year due to her constant mistakes, rude interactions with our dealer network, and inability to effectively manage her workload. I feel to this day, had the genders been reversed, there would have been a 100 different outcome. Basically, even after the employee admitted to the attack and my medical leave HR didn't want to admit the incident took place. Story 32, EA made me work a double shift on Thanksgiving Day. At the end of the shift, as I left, they fired me. That company, I tend to notice a lot of people get fired shortly after becoming disabled, whether it be long-term or short-term. Of course, they can't say it's because the disability, so they'll make up a lie saying they violated a coupon policy or just not performing well. Story 33, local company went bankrupt. Bank took over ownership, had sheriff evict all employees next morning. Bank reps then put chains on the doors. Nobody allowed back in. A few months later, bank hired auction company to sell assets. I went to auction. Each office was sold complete, with each door numbered. If you want an office, they gave you the key, and you had to take everything out that day. It made me sick to see these offices the same as the day the company closed, coats on hangers, family photos, personal possessions, work folders and papers on desks, as if they just gone out to lunch. Horrible what they did to those workers. Everyone there was horrified, thought it had to be illegal. But no, it very much happened. Property was sold too, and turns out company had been dumping chemicals out back for decades. So even new owner got screwed too, to tune of millions for cleanup. Story 34, not HR, but I can certainly tell you how Amazon HR screwed me over pretty good. I have worked for the company twice. On the second occasion, years after the first, I filled out my application, W-2, etc. When it came time to get paid, they mailed my first check to the address I living the first time I worked for the company. Ex-wife gets the check in the mail, forges my signature, and cashes it. Amazon refused to reissue the check. I went round and round with HR for months about this. Corporate lawyers were pulled in. My personal lawyer stuck up for me at no charge. Due to GA state law where the check was cashed, I had no legal recourse to sue for my money back, as it was up to Wells Fargo to sue press charges on my ex. Amazon stood by their claim that the check was cashed and I was paid. The entire time they treated me like a criminal and made out like I was attempting to grift them. They offered to pay up if signed an affidavit stating that I had never received the check, but backed out on the day I was supposed to sign the documents because we don't have a notary at this location and Amazon isn't willing to pay for one. Story 35, my dad worked in community relations for a big company for 35 years. He was one of 2 candidates for a manager position a few years back and should have gotten the job, but they gave it to this lady who then became my dad's boss. For years she made his work life, always condescending, always rude. My dad had a performance review once. And since he always did wonderful work and everyone else loved him, the only thing she found him out for was slouching at his desk, and he was at the office too much. The whole ordeal actually affected his mental health to a point that he had to take a leave of absence for 6 weeks, and had his doctor sign some papers saying that his work environment was the direct cause of his current mental state, and that he shouldn't be forced to work under this woman's management any longer. The company puts him back anyway. Few months later, they conveniently decide that my dad's job needs to be moved to an office in another state, and if he wants to remain employed, he can move to said state or be laid off. Just before he was eligible for retirement pension, all that good stuff. Story 36, I was the SE Mass Bobbery rep for a delivery company. Driver shows up at a restaurant stoned, smoke billowing out of his cab. HR took his keys when he got back. He had been there years and was an amazing worker, always on time. Did a good job, but you can't drive a DOT vehicle while smoking pot. Frank, WTF, man. Story 37, HR is not on your side. They work for the company and you are a disposable diaper. Their job is to ensure that you get the least amount of pay and benefits possible. If you could be replaced at some point with a less expensive employee, then they facilitate that happening. Most HR people are short people who were bullied when younger and now try to get even. They are evil. Story 38, manufacturing company in the 90s. Company announces it will be moving an entire specialized line to China. Lays off everyone who worked on that line. Later that year, company announces we hit the financial goals and they want to share the good fortune. They give everyone a piece of junk, flimsy plastic, manual Win 35mm camera with a made in China sticker on it. They must have cost all of one or so each. Within approximately a year, they brought that line back because the Chinese line couldn't make the parts right, but they didn't bring back any of the employees they laid off. Story 39. So a lot of stories here. So, hey, race a good one. I was let go by my company after 5 years. Got a decent severance around $10K. Come Monday morning, I answer an ad for a freelance designer. I email the company, and within 30 minutes, they call me back. And it turned into a 4-year freelance gig. Came out 10 grand ahead. Nice, huh? One other thing. Even though HR is letting you go, you don't have to tell them anything. They want all the info they can get out of you in case a lawsuit arises. Tell them nothing. It's none of their business.